So a couple weeks ago, a student, a client, an old friend of mine asked me to make a video about Kundalini Awakening for his family, just to help explain the process. And so a little bit about myself. I'm a spiritual teacher, but I'm also a counselor, a psychotherapist who has a master's in psychology. This process of Kundalini Awakening may sound like something wild and crazy that's happened to your son or daughter or partner. And I thought I'd just give a little bit of a, just a little bit of a helpful understanding. So your son, let's just say your son here, is going through something big. He's going through something profound. And it's important that you support him, one, in believing him that he's going through, believing them that they're going through something profound. And that this profound energetic awakening, it might cause them to have some anxiety, some feelings of depression, some feelings of confusion. Just as when you, the parent or the partner or whoever it is or the friend, looks at your son and says, my God, what's going on with them? They were completely normal one day and they started practicing meditation or doing yoga, or maybe it happened just spontaneously and they started to awaken into some bizarre, strange spiritual state. Now, these things have been happening to human beings since the beginning of time. In the last couple decades, this has actually made it into the DSM-5. And so this is something that psychologists actually study. So it's not just some crazy thing that your kid or your partner read about on the internet and said, this is happening to me. No, this is something that's been happening since the beginning of time. And now there's actual psychological diagnosis for it, if that's helpful to make it a little bit more grounded for you and understanding what it is. But when someone opens up and begins to awaken, basically what's happening is they're having a shift in identity. So most human beings know themselves to be this ego, which comes, with the conditioning, conditioning through growing up in a family system and being educated a certain way. Maybe we have a job or a career. But when this profound energetic awakening happens, one's consciousness begins to unhook from their small egoic identity and begins to become much more expanded into a spiritual identity. Now, in that shift, it's not something that just happens like that. If Kundalini is involved, which is all the energetics of it, the profound energy moving through the body, then there's going to be a mental shift, which will be very disorienting and oftentimes provoke or bring about anxiety or depression. An emotional opening and shift in identity, and again, that can bring about some anxiety or confusion or disorientation or feeling like they're dissolving or like they're dying, because in one sense, their small human ego, who they knew themselves to be, like I once knew myself to be Craig, and Craig grew up in a military family, and he was a hippie and he liked the Grateful Dead and this type of thing. But when I started to experience this awakening, I started to feel as if I wasn't that character anymore. I felt as if I was as big as the sky, and my heart was huge and overflowing with love. But there was also times when I would plummet into depressive states or really anxious states as this energy of awakening. It's an energy of evolution that's happening very quickly. For a lot of women, they experience this once a month through their hormonal cycle, as they experience, let's just say a lesser version of this, where I don't feel like myself. I feel a lot of anxiety, or maybe I feel a little bit depressed, or, I start to feel really good for some women. And so spiritual awakening is similar, but it can be much more intense. So it's like a hormonal change, but let's say on steroids, just to make it a little bit more confusing and complicated. So basically, again, to use the example of your son's going through a change in identity, where they no longer know themselves as just a normal human being, but where they see the face of God in everything. And or they feel spacious, or their sense of freedom. They may suddenly quit their job or leave a relationship, or just they might start staring at a wall and, be drooling on themselves for short periods of time, hopefully, where they're just falling in love with the beauty of the colors of the wall, or, they might say, I just want to spend time in nature. But for a lot of people, in order for this transformation to complete, they actually have to heal all their emotional wounds. And this is where it gets really complicated and messy. If we could all just sit down under the Bodhi tree, like for example the Buddha did, and have a profound awakening and touch the earth and say, this is what's real, and then see divinity everywhere, that would be wonderful. But that's a myth. What it more looks like is a very messy process where you start to feel yourself as divine, but then all the old aspects of your human self come forward, and they're saying, hey, if there's divinity here, we want to be healed. And so oftentimes every wound from the past, every anxiety, every feeling of being bullied or taken advantage of or abused will rush forward into the light. And that can be very confusing for the individual experiencing Kundalini awakening. And the biggest thing you can do as a support person with your son or daughter or partner or friend is to gently love them, give them space, give them no pressure that they have to perform, that they have to go back to work, that they have to be the person they once thought themselves to be. What you can do, the most helpful thing you can do, is provide a sense of space. And just a gentle sense of, I see you, I love you, and I care. If you want to share what you're going through, you're welcome to tell me. But don't expect that you will understand it. And don't try to fix it. Because when someone's going through anxiety or confusion or feeling very disoriented, what they want is just someone to listen and to help them get on with their basic needs. What they don't need is someone telling them, you're crazy, this is all in your head, this is some kooky stuff you read on the internet, you shouldn't have visited that Indian guru, or you shouldn't have gone to that fundamentalist Bible healing camp, or whatever it was, that we could say in a judgmental tone. Normally this awakening happens in a spiritual context, but not always, but normally. But the best thing we can do is just acknowledge something big has happened, and just to help them get grounded. So take them on walks, spend time with them in nature, hold their hand, light gentle massage, financial support, because oftentimes the person becomes so confused they can't work, at least temporarily. When this happened to me, I was a single father and I had 2 kids. I couldn't work any longer. I basically spent 2 years on the couch just scraping by, going into tremendous debt. But I spent that 2 years healing, just laying in bed, healing, being kind to myself, getting up, taking care of my kids, taking them to school and this and that, and then laying on the couch and just letting all the past unravel. And it's a time of tremendous healing, of accelerated healing. But it can be people can easily slip into the dark night of the soul when they're going through this profound awakening. It can be very taxing on their body. Oftentimes they can go into chronic fatigue syndrome, or ME, or have fibromyalgia, or these strange bizarre symptoms, intense pain in their back or their head, and feeling pressurized in different chakra centers. And the big thing is to help them get support. Body work is good. Meeting with someone like me is good. Reading Bonnie Greenwell's books on Kundalini can be helpful for you and for them. Sometimes seeing an acupuncturist can be helpful. Sometimes that excites the energy. Sometimes chiropractors are helpful. Sometimes that excites it. In rare cases, psychotropic drugs like SSRIs, Prozac, can be helpful sometimes in rare cases. Please do not ever take the benzo classification of drugs. Those can create immense side effects, very damaging for the individual, and these have a particularly bad impact and reaction with the Kundalini process and spiritual awakening process. So I don't recommend those drugs. They're a horrible classification of drugs. But oftentimes doctors and psychiatrists say, oh, you have anxiety and psychosis, let's give you a benzo drug. which will calm the individual down, but will greatly harm your nervous system, and they're more difficult to get off than, say, heroin or these painkillers that people are addicted to, like Oxycontin. So please don't take benzos. But the big thing is to get them in contact with someone they can talk to help normalize the process. So have them getting in contact with a spiritual teacher, a spiritual community, some good friends, and just having time to breathe, feel, and relax. And your job is to be patient with them, loving with them, understanding with them. And I hate to say it, but I'll just use this comparison, but a Kundalini Awakening is kind of similar to having a psychotic break, but you're not going crazy with Kundalini Awakening. You are waking up into your divine nature, into the realization that you're a child of God, that what you are is something greater than just a small human ego, from Memphis, Tennessee or something, and I'm this kind of person, and this is my job, and this is my identity. You're waking up into a greater identity, where you're identifying with your divinity, your timeless nature, your soul. And again, this has happened since the beginning of time. God has chosen to wake up in some individuals, and for the people around them, it's confusing. Like, what happened to Craig? Why is he acting so silly and strange? Why is he spending so much time staring at the clouds? But I assure you, if you support your friend, daughter, son, partner, and just helping them to become more grounded, be real gentle, be understanding, not pressuring them, but giving them the time to heal, you will begin to understand, as they will, that there's a universal intelligence here, that this awakening it's a massive step in evolution, and eventually after they get grounded and things become integrated, which may take anywhere between 6 months and 12 years, if they follow a good course, that they will step into a much greater life where they experience more peace, more happiness, more joy, more unconditional love toward themselves and towards others. And so it's an upgrade in consciousness. And so it's not a regression. It seems like a regression when they're going through the messy process. But keep in mind, this is the intelligence of God at play. And if you support them, and if they have good support, and meet with someone who's actually educated and been through the process like myself, then we end up in a much greater place. If we diagnose them with psychosis and tell them they're crazy, and then they get lost in their thoughts of anxiety and fear, and they're not getting any support like body work or chiropractics or any healing work, they're not doing their psychological healing work, oftentimes that dark night of the soul experience they can spin out for many years. And so anyways, I hope that's helpful, and I know a lot of this is probably really confusing and, sounds like, some hogwash that someone's making up, but I can reassure you, I'm a very grounded individual. I have 3 kids, and we have a big, happy family. I'm working very busy with my job and this type of thing. And the reason I bring up the job thing is because so many people lose their jobs when they go through this process, and they have a concern that their son or daughter is just going to be a homeless person on the street. But if you support them, eventually they'll get their life back together, but in a greater way. They'll finally be living their truth, stepping into their truth, and they'll be much happier than they were before this all happened. And so the big thing is, can you trust? Can you be light and gentle with them? And just understand that for some reason, God's will, God chose to awaken in them. And just like, at one point there was nothing, and God chose to have the Big Bang, and all of a sudden there became something. Kundalini Awakening, spiritual awakening, is very much like the Big Bang happening in you. That out of nowhere, this big explosion of energy, of grace, of consciousness starts flowing through your body. And it's very disorienting, very confusing. But if you trust, and if you understand that healing is oftentimes messy and invites you to see through all the different layers and confusion and hell that's within you, and as you meet it with love, eventually healing occurs and you step into a greater state of consciousness. So anyways, I hope that was helpful. I have all kinds of classes, and I do twice a week, and also do online sessions. So, and may peace be with you all, and take good care. And like I said, if you need support, there's details below on how to get a hold of me.